Okay, we're going to call the meeting to order. This is the October 26th Council Committee work session. Welcome, everybody. We have two items on our agenda tonight. The first one is Agenda Bill 7258, temporary moratorium related to certain permit applications. And we are going to welcome Keith Niven. I think he has a short presentation. And then I was going to let folks from the public know, anybody's here who would like to make comments. If you could sign up on the sheet that's outside. And because we need to be efficient, I'm going to limit the, make a couple of limits. One is a 2-minute time period, and also to new information only. So if you have information that you've previously presented to the council, I would ask that you respect our time here and limit your comments to new information. And part of the reason, like I said, is to be efficient. We're supposed to have a 3-hour budget, and we've cut out an hour to talk about the moratorium. So we just need to be efficient. And we will have that time for public comment after we have the presentation and after the council has had its conversation with the administration. So, Keith.
So thank you, Council President Goodman. So good evening, City Council. So this evening really represents, so the City Council held a public hearing on October 17th to discuss the emergency moratorium. And there were 22 people who spoke, either for or in opposition of the moratorium or to change the moratorium. And so when the council closed the public hearing and started some deliberations on proposals for amending the ordinance, there was a lot of conversation, and it was decided to bring that topic back here to this meeting for hopefully a little bit more thoughtful conversation. So part of what I tried to do here this evening was to really just facilitate a continuation of that conversation. And in so doing, I provided y'all with a memo for this evening, which provided obviously the purpose for the memo, the background. And then I suggested some policy questions at the bottom of the first page, which, there were 4. Does the moratorium benefit the community? I mean, I think that's the first question that should be, thought through. The second is, has the testimony received and project-specific information provided caused the council to rethink the parameters of the moratorium? So part of what I attached to this memorandum is some additional finer grain level of detail about each of the projects that got caught by the moratorium, and we can talk about those in a minute. Third, does the proposed work plan lessen the concerns by the City Council that the perceived deficiencies in the Central Issaquah plan will be addressed in a timely manner? And we talked about that very briefly. As part of the packet for the hearing, there was a memorandum from the mayor, which identified a 6-month, 12-month, and 18-month work plan. And we didn't spend much time talking about that on the 17th, and I don't know that we will tonight either. I think tonight's really more talking about amendments to the ordinance. And then 4, would an adjustment lessen any of the unintended consequences of emergency action? So having kind of put that out there, what I did was basically suggest 6 different ways in which the council could change the moratorium. And I'm not here to necessarily recommend any of those, but to really throw them out there and explain why I thought it garnered at least a choice on this matrix. So first would be to lift the moratorium. Obviously, if you lifted the moratorium, not only would the 22 projects that got caught in the moratorium be allowed to move forward, but then also everything else that is kind of swirling around that hasn't even come through the doors yet would be able to move forward. The second choice was reestablish a moratorium vesting. And by the way, the city attorney's here, so if there's any conversation or questions about whether any of this is actually accurate or causes any legal implications, I would assume Jim will raise his hand and jump up and say something. So the second is you could reestablish the moratorium vesting to schedule pre-apps and pick a date into the future so that those 20, actually it's 21 projects, because the Commons, even though the Commons was listed as one of the 22 that got caught, we've had some preliminary conversations with the Commons about redeveloping, but they actually haven't formalized that into a proposal. So I listed them as still sitting out there because, frankly, I'm not sure that even in the next year the Commons would be ready to move forward with something. But basically what that would do is, and the reason why I included that was, the moratorium was enacted without public notice as an emergency action. And I think some of the comments that we've heard from the community is if they would have known, maybe they would have moved their applications forward quicker. And they got caught because it was a surprise. So the third choice would be reduce the geography of the moratorium from citywide to just central Issaquah. And as we've talked about previously, of the 6 issues that the council identified as concerning, 5 of them relate solely to central Issaquah and the central Issaquah plan, and the one that relates potentially citywide would be affordable housing. And, there's, I think, 127 housing units that right now are kind of queued up that are caught by the moratorium. And if you reduce the geography to central Issaquah only, 111 of those would be able to move forward. And most of those are in the form of smaller projects, which you heard a lot of testimony about the smaller projects, which is actually my 4th proposal, which is to allow small projects, less than 5 residential units or 3,000 square feet of commercial or retail space to move forward. I think one of the things that we heard a lot from the testimony on the moratorium was that small projects really don't impact the city the same way as big projects do. The projects like the Atlas and the Gateway projects, and the scale of those projects are impacting our community in a way that we're not used to. These smaller projects have historically, except when we had moratoriums, been allowed to move forward. And so I think that they are less new to our community than maybe some of the bigger projects that we've seen recently. Number 5 is allow projects that include a council-adopted mobility improvement. So there's really only one in the list that does this, but one of the big concerns we've heard from the community is traffic, transportation, getting around town. It's getting more difficult and more difficult. One of these projects has, as a component to it, a proposed traffic signal at Gilman and the Three Trails crossing. And, this is the Three Trails crossing is on the city's walk and roll plan, and one of those, or non-motorized TIP, and that would be something that we've identified as a benefit to our community. And then the last one is, and we talked about this a little bit at the hearing, but I didn't put much time into this one because it's really hard to quantify. So you could allow projects that meet all 6 criteria to move forward. Now, I don't know who gets to be the judge of that. That gets to put somebody in a really awkward spot. And so that one's not my favorite, but it was at least, it's a choice. And I think part of what I want to do with y'all is maybe engage in any of these choices and start to unpack them a little bit to say, okay, what does this really mean? And I, on the next page, I actually listed the 22 projects and if they're residential, how many units they would be, and if they're non-residential, how much square footage that would be. And there's actually a few, as we've heard, there's a few projects that we've heard from that are actually not part of that 22 list because they actually hadn't come in yet for a pre-app. And we really, even though they'd come in and talked to the city a few times, they actually hadn't registered. And so there's actually a few other projects that we know about that are kind of swirling around and that right now are caught. So these 23 through 26 on this table are actually added to the 22 that right now. And that number, as we keep talking about the moratorium, that number kind of keeps getting bigger as we become aware of more and more projects that might be out there that are wondering whether they can move forward or not. So that's kind of all my intro. If you have questions or thoughts or want me to sit down.
No, don't sit down. Don't sit down. So I probably raised my hand prematurely. So I don't know how useful the first question is that you have there. Does the moratorium benefit the community? I'm not sure what I guess my alternative policy question that would replace that would be, is there a desire to change the moratorium scope? And that would be sort of two questions under that. And one would be, is there a desire to change it in area, so not citywide, something smaller? And then the next question would be changes that would create exemptions, for example. And then, or a new vesting line, and then what if there's a desire to extend that beyond 6 months based on some sort of work plan that we provide, one of the work plans that you would get feedback on tonight. But maybe the first thing to do is to ask questions about your chart. And I think the first question I want to ask is number 4, or maybe 4. Let's start with 4, and I think that would apply to 5 as well. So if one of the options is allow projects less than 5 residential units or 3,000 square feet, by the way, this is probably hard for folks to read at home.
Sorry.
So I want to make sure that I understand and that everyone's clear on what you mean here. That's not just those small projects that are currently on that fell below the line. It would be any project that comes forward, not only those, but others that want to come forward during the moratorium that are less than 5 or 3,000, so it lets in more than just what's on the list now that got caught. Is that what you're proposing? Not proposing, is that what this means?
So you could read that either way.
Okay.
So I think, one choice would be, and Jim, let me know if I'm out of bounds. One choice could be that you say, okay, if you wanted to let the projects go that meet this criteria, but basically say there's a spot where that we're considering these, but anything forward, then it seems like you also have to pick a date where you assign to that as well. Otherwise, if you don't do that, if you just allow this as an exemption, then, say 2 months from now, if somebody comes in with a 2,500 square foot convenience mart or gas station,
right,
it goes. Right? So I think you could do it either way. I don't know that I was proposing one or the other. I initially had another column on this table, which was what's the propensity that we would get other projects if this was just opened completely. I think for the small projects, the likelihood that we would get more over the moratorium period is great. But the impact of those in cumulative is small. So even though we might get another, 5 or 6 short plats, at the end of the day, that's 20 lots, right? And citywide, 20 lots are barely perceptible.
Can I make a disclosure?
You talk to Jim.
Yeah, should I just go talk to him or just
I would just go talk to him now. Okay, so questions? No? Because, Tola?
Can you show me again on the list, so this category 4, if you parsed it further and just said units that were outside the central area,
Yeah.
what it would go to?
So units, so right now, units or projects, the 22 projects that are in CIP, I marked them with kind of an orange color in the CIP box. So I have to kind of go back and forth. So 12 projects on that list on the next page show up as marked. It's 111 housing units and 12,000 square feet of non-residential.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, which of those 12, what's the union of those 12 and the 7 that meet the criteria under category 4?
Oh, I see. So great question. So clearly, so number 5 is the small project. Number 8 is the small project. Number 6, sorry, I skipped 6. So 12 is a union. So the thing is most of those small projects are in Old Town and elsewhere. And so CIP tends to be a little bit bigger scale, which is, I think, one of the issues we've identified in what we've seen in the CIP is just the scale of those projects.
So if you said on these small projects as we define them, if you said the moratorium was everywhere for the big projects and for the small projects just in the central area, you would then exclude most of the small projects, right? There's only like one that would still be in them.
Yes, that's what this chart would show, is that there's one. It's the L15 salon parking expansion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I have a question.
Mary Lou?
Disclosure. So disclosure first. As most of the other council members here, I do own property in town. I own property actually in Old Town that we have been into the city to talk about a plat. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. We're not one of the projects listed here. And I have reviewed it with the city's attorney to make sure that I took the right measures tonight, which is to disclose that this evening. And then my question, Keith, actually goes to what I consider to be one of the odd situations on here is in the central Issaquah area, the code, the new vision in the code is around redevelopment and densification of the area. But there's a project listed on here which for one reason or another looks like it is more of a remodel without the use changing and without new trips impacts at all. And it's this Gilman Jackson's. So most of everything else that we're looking at is really in that category of taking a piece of land and putting more intense use on it.
Right.
How does this one fall on the list when it really just looks like it's something else?
So that's a hard one because we had that conversation. We held a meeting of commercial brokers last week and talked through that with them because so we allowed tenant improvements and remodels as an excluded piece of the moratorium.
Correct.
But when you do something, I'm going to take an example that hopefully you guys can remember. So if you remember what existed before the corner bakery, it used to be a Denny's. And basically because they came in and said, we want to completely wipe it out and redo it, it needs a land use permit. And so what's tripping them up is when it actually triggers a land use permit as opposed to just a tenant improvement or remodel. So for example, another project in that same shopping center is the Round Table Pizza, and that's turning into a different restaurant. And the only thing that's going to happen outside is they want a couple outdoor tables. So it's a tenant improvement on the inside. It doesn't require new land use permits, so it can move forward as just a change of ownership and occupation. But if you wanted to, so for the Jacksons, that would be a complete, scrape of what's there now. Kind of like what they did here at Sunset in front, and they would build a brand new building. Well, that requires land use permits, so that's why it's stuck.
And I guess I figured it was a land use permit, but I guess when you look at the 6 reasons for having the moratorium in central Issaquah, which applies, which one does this, it doesn't apply to any of those.
Well, it's about scale and impact. So,
Right.
so a
Gas
remodel,
station with a gas
remodel
station.
of a gas station, you know, it's probably going to look like this one that's down here, or maybe a close cousin of it. And the question is if we had implemented the architectural review in central Issaquah, would the architecture have ultimately looked differently,
Okay, that's fair.
or not?
Fair
Don't
enough.
know.
That's fair enough, yep.
'Cause we haven't
That
written those
makes
guidelines
sense.
yet.
Okay.
Bill?
So to follow that same point, the other project in my mind that kind of fell in that category is item number 26, the office conversion, which sounded like a tenant remodel to me also, but is that because is it residential going to commercial? Is that that's the thing that?
Residential going to commercial requires land use permit, which is
Even though they're
why he's
staying
stuck.
inside the building, it's a tenant remodel, but because it's
And
residential.
it's outside of
commercial.
central,
Really
it's in Old Town,
classification.
and yeah, so yes, that is why.
Okay.
Mariah?
So for number 4, Keith, the definition of small projects, was that just a data point that was chosen, 5 residential and 3,000 square feet? We could go above that, below that? It is
So it's clearer on the residential side. So there's a better, you know, where I picked the point. When you get to non-residential, it's a little fuzzier. So short plat right now under city code is maxed out at 4 units or less. Okay, so basically this includes short plats. 3,000 square feet, arbitrarily pick that number. So if that wants to be less, it could be less, or it could be more. But, you know, in the past, we've kind of said 10,000 square feet for non-residential is considered small. But for me, that seems a little big. So for me, it wanted to be, so 3,000 square feet, if you think about it, a big house in town is 3,000 square feet. You know, some of the smaller shops we have are 3,000 square feet. So it seemed like that is why that made sense for me. But that one was, just to be honest, that one was more arbitrary than the residential one was.
okay. Thank you.
Bill?
The other question around that's not addressed here is acreage. Okay? So 4 units on 2 acres is different than 4 units on 1/3 of an acre.
Sure.
Where they're doing, you know, 3 or 4 stories and, you know, making something fairly large in a neighborhood that maybe is quite unique.
Right.
And new, versus if those are really 4 small units. So we don't, that information isn't here on how those kind of things lay out, because I think those are different as well.
Absolutely. So the impacts of the number of units, traffic, water consumption, number of people that we're adding to our community, those are arguably about the same, although clearly if they're 1-bedroom units versus, but it's like how many different ways do you want to slice this, right? And so, you know, could have done it from a density perspective and said, you know, okay, if you're more than 5 units per acre, that's a problem, you know, but that seemed to take me down a rabbit hole I didn't want to go. So I didn't go there, but we could if that's a desire of the council.
L15 salon parking. That's the only parking one in here? And is that something we really, is this the salon that is across from Issaquah Valley,
Yes.
where the cars are always on the roadway?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. But that is the only parking one in this entire,
Yes.
okay. And, okay, thank you. I'll think on it.
And what is that? Describe that more for me.
So the business is doing well. They're parking right now, they're parallel parking on Newport. And what my understanding of what this proposal is to expand the parking lot for the business, but it's expanding it as a surface parking lot. And so even though it's kind of small in scale, it does touch on one of the sensitivity points that the council had related to the moratorium, and that was we were kind of continuing to get surface parking along with our projects, and that's not necessarily the vision for Central Issaquah.
Okay. Tola?
there was a question earlier about, if you had 4 units on a small lot and seeing something that was tall. Right now, we have tall development in the valley, and we don't have, except in the urban villages, we don't have tall things going up on the hills. This moratorium is going to be finite in length, and the question I have, I guess, is around the law of unintended consequences. This time frame that we're looking at, 6 months, would we have to worry that if we did something that inhibited the development of multifamily, let's say, in the valley, on this sort of a timeline, do we have to worry that people might pivot and want to start trying to make arguments to put multifamily in the hills, which, we've sort of said for a long time was part of the whole point of the CIP was to bring dense development into the valley. So it would be tragic if we wound up doing the exact opposite. Or is this time frame such that you really don't have to worry about that? I mean, clearly, if it was a 10-year moratorium, it'd be different than a 6-month moratorium, right?
Absolutely. So I can answer that a few different ways. One is, my sense is if we're talking about a year, the conversation is way different than if it goes beyond a year. So if it goes beyond a year, then when people start to not look at Issaquah, it just gets to be a place where they're going to bypass because the rest of the east side cities are growing so quickly that there's momentum there. So part of the conversation is time. The other piece is I don't know that we have that much developable land. So when you look at our buildable lands and you look at the hillsides, there is, and when you say hillsides, because the moratorium is currently citywide, and we can continue to drive this down to a finer grain if we want to talk about what does this mean if we go to CIP only. But right now, the only projects that can move forward are the villages. And, Talus is done from a residential standpoint. The Highlands has another 200 units left. But right now, the owner of those 200 units is envisioning single-family attached and detached units. So even though that could happen, I think the likelihood is fairly small that we would all of a sudden see the apartment focus move to the hillsides.
All right, thank you.
Other questions right now? Bill?
You said Tola but there's part of the valley that's not in the CIP, so it could go out to those parts of the valley that aren't in the CIP.
So if one of the choices was to change the geography to just the CIP, I think clearly what Councilmember Martz expressed as a concern would likely happen. So if I'm wanting to build apartments and I can get funding right now because the market's supporting the construction of additional apartments, we would be looking at other, and I heard Councilmember Polly refer to it as the fringe. The fringe properties would become, I think, highlighted if you were wanting to build in the city new apartment space. Absolutely.
Any other questions? Mariah?
Keith, could you just give me a quick reminder about Gilman Point? We talked about mobility improvement. Just another quick
Right.
overview of that.
So where Gilman Point is, it's basically just west of Pagacha.
Right.
So Pagacha's there, and then there's actually a property that's partially under construction now. So what happens is you've got the King County Trail kind of comes to Gilman right there, and there's actually a non-vehicular crossing, but it's kind of a half a block to the west. There's a signalized crossing at that location, but I think what we know just from kind of observations is a lot of our bicyclists and some of our pedestrians are choosing to just go straight across the street in that location. As we talked about this a little bit at infrastructure, the hard part about that location is actually the southern leg, which is where kind of like the Washington Federal is, because we have our streets come in right at that intersection. The queuing for a signal is going to be hard to figure out. But if we move forward with the project there as a partnership with a private development, then the city would work on that kind of fourth leg of the intersection and figuring it out as part of our kind of capital projects.
And that project, again, is,
So the Gilman Lofts project, what it is
Lofts,
it's,
okay.
but it's not residential. It's retail on the ground floor. It's, is it 3 stories of kind of flex space, office space above it? And then the parking right now is tuck under.
okay, I wanted to make sure I had that right in my head. Thank you.
Any other questions right now? Bill?
Could you tell me a little more about Space Labs? They were here, but they didn't get into the detail of what they're looking at that huge piece there.
So we had a collaboration meeting. So that's what CoLab stands for. So right now, Space Labs is there's an office space and and kind of a tech space there. So 2 different buildings. The potential purchaser is looking to demolish those existing buildings and build approximately 226 townhouses.
Paul?
Thank you. A few minutes ago, Keith, you, in answered, I think you used the fringe. You talked about focus would go into those properties outside the CIP. So just to be absolutely clear, I think, so what you're saying is that if we were to, I think that assessment said, when it comes, especially when it came to, say, apartment building, that if we were to limit the moratorium to the boundaries of the CIP, we could, in effect, create something that we were trying to avoid. Completely the opposite. Our goal was to get the densification and the growth to happen in the central area to preserve the character of the existing neighborhoods. So if we, was that, you're nodding your head, was that what you were implying?
I think that's absolutely likely.
I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
So how can we help you? So I'm thinking we can have a structured feedback sort of conversation right now. And I have some thoughts about how we can do that. And then I want to stop at, I don't know, 20 quarter till, allow public comment. And then if council members have comments, follow-up comments that they would like to make after public comment, then we can do that because we need to end at 7.
Yes.
So so you can guide this and
Sure.
and ask us questions. And I mean, one way we could do this, and we've done it before, where you could go down each. You got 6 items here, plus you've got an area question. Do we
Yep.
shrink it?
Yep.
And we could go down the line and make comments, or we can limit it to. So the first one, how do you feel about completely lifting the moratorium? And somebody who's interested in doing that can speak, and I guess we would assume that maybe people who don't speak are not interested, and that saves us some time,
That would be great.
for example.
Yeah.
Tola?
So I have a question. I'm wondering, I personally want something that's actually not any one of those, but actually a combination of several of them.
You're
So I'm
not
wondering
limited
if-
to this.
Right. I'm sort of wondering if we just want to go around and say which ones people are particularly interested in talking about.
Sure, we can
And then
do
we
that.
could just focus on those.
We can do that.
So I'll start. Okay. I'm interested in talking about 3 and 4 and a combination of 3 and 4. The combination of 3 and 4 would be the moratorium applies to any place in the central area or any large project, defined as more than 5 or more units and more than 3,000 square feet.
Keith, can you scroll it down so we can see?
Yes,
3 and 4?
sorry.
Thanks.
Busy writing notes.
And keep writing notes at the same time.
So those are the 3 options I'm interested in talking about.
And that was an and as a conjunction. Sorry, Stacy.
No, go ahead.
And.
Yeah, the moratorium would apply to anything in the central area.
Yes.
Or
And.
anything large. And,
Yes.
or anything large. No, not just things that are in the central area that are large. Anything that's in the central area would have a moratorium.
Yes.
And anything that's large in the whole city would have a moratorium.
Right, unless it's otherwise excluded because it's in a development agreement or something like
Yeah,
that.
of course,
Yeah, yeah.
of course,
Okay.
of course.
Okay.
And when you say you want to talk about that,
I just wondered if we wanted to pull, because I mean, if nobody wants to look at, let's say, number 2 or number 1, then we don't have to time on it. But it's up to you. Mainly, I just wanted to get that there's an option that's a combination.
I'm just trying to be, when you say you want to talk about it, that's what you're most interested in considering for Keith's consideration. Is that what you
Yes.
mean? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Next.
I'll go.
Okay.
I'm on the same page as Toa, 3 and/or 4 together. Same rationale. I don't believe we should be lifting the moratorium. I do not believe we should be reestablishing the moratorium vesting to the pre-schedule. At the time the moratorium was enacted as emerging moratorium, I don't think most people realized that there were still 20 more projects at least in the pipeline, so I'm not in favor of that. The council adopted mobility improvement. The only reason that kind of doesn't sit well with me is because redevelopment and intensification of any property in the CIP comes with additional car trips. And just the improvements from one project doesn't really address what the residential concern is citywide with mobility issues. So yes, there's a benefit, but it also comes with more trips. The redevelopment. And what was the last one? Allow project, yeah. The last one, I don't even know how you would do that. I don't know how you would set that up.
So I'll go next. 5 and 6 concern me. 5 requires some sort of subjective determination. That concerns me. Number 6. Yeah, I don't know how you meet all of the 6 areas of concern to move forward when we don't yet know what we need to meet them. I would have to think more about continue to include the CIP and large projects. 4, I would have to say probably 4 resonates more with me. Not at this point seriously considering 1, 2, and 3.
So lifting the moratorium is not something that I would be interested in talking about right now. And number 2, the same. I would be interested in discussing number 3, but I do have concerns about reducing this geographically to the CIP only, but would like to talk about it in here more. Number 4, I'd be interested in talking about. Number 5, I've got some concerns, but I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about it. And number 6, sounds sort of impossible. So.
But thank you for adding it.
Just throw one out there. I'll jump in. So the only thing that appeals to me at all is I guess 4, looking at some exceptions. But, and really, what really bothers me, any kind of geographical opening up, it just, it's like an amoeba. You squish it one place, it's going to come out somewhere else. And the fact that most of the projects now are really happening outside the CIP, and we want them inside the CIP, and keeping a moratorium on the CIP and letting other stuff happen is totally contradictory to the CIP. It's making the attempt at getting success there even harder to accomplish, because it's people are going to look elsewhere, and they're not even going to consider there, and so our redevelopment there is going to go even further down on the list. So that really doesn't, I think that's a serious problem that would cause us long-term problems against what we're working towards. Another comment, I know that at our public hearing, we had a predominant number of folks that were talking about these exceptions, like 18 or 19 of the 22 or so. But that's a piece of, and we've had a lot of input from other sources, written and so forth, and those were, in my mind, reading predominantly for the moratorium. So I remember to balance that whole picture, and it's not just all the exceptions we're looking at the other support that didn't, those folks didn't come into the public hearing, but they had a lot of support for their various reasons as well, and they were also scattered a bit across the board for their various reasons of support. So that balances more to me than saying like the newspaper said, predominant support for, you know, exceptions to the moratorium, but they didn't see the other ones. So yeah, my problem with the long run is where to draw that line. Unlike some comments have been said here, are 6 items for the moratorium. People say all but one applies, you know, just to CIP, Central Issaquah. I don't believe that. I think all but one applies to the CIP only, the mixed use. All the rest of them apply to the rest of Issaquah as well. Maybe to not as dominant a degree, but I think if we start doing stuff outside the CIP as we're doing now, we're going to get things that I think we need to review all our codes and our listings in all the neighborhoods to make sure we have what we want. So as we develop, that's good, because the pressure is going to be on outside very heavily. We see that already. The evidence is that the pressure is on more outside than actually inside the CIP. So loosening that up, and we're going to get those taller buildings that also don't want. That's why I asked a question about acreage. So it may be, you know, somewhere where all of a sudden, yeah, it's only 3 units, but those 3 units are 4 stories tall. And all of a sudden they're popping up, and that's not really what we want. And some of those codes allow some of those taller heights that people aren't paying attention to because no one's done it yet. But some of those taller heights are are allowed in a number of places. So that's my concern. So I'd like to be able to help some of these exceptions, but I'm just not sure where to draw that line and blanketly across there. You mentioned the fact about a date. You know, I wouldn't want this thing to be open-ended, that everything under this, past this point, can come in there, because that just, it opens a door. So if we did some exceptions, it would be very specific exceptions in my mind. The ones that have already been talked about, not the ones that keep coming in. There you go.
Eileen?
I've been reading through all of these, and I keep going back to everybody that was speaking before us in the last couple of sessions have came to the city with good intentions and have been provided with some form or portion of agreement to move forward with their plot or their program or their housing unit or whatever it is, their portion that they're applying for. And it's really hard to sit here as and all of a sudden draw a line and say, well, you know, you did come before us and you did schedule and go through your application, but now we are going to deny you the ability to continue to move forward. But, you know, as I'm hearing, if you were a small project, we would approve you, but considering that you're a little bit larger. So I keep going back to number 2. The fact that we just simply need to have the action that allows the projects that were surprised by this emergency action to move forward. I realize it's a fairly large number, but I have to stay with 2. I just find it very difficult to sit here this evening and say, I would allow small projects or I would allow projects that only if, but you had already applied, and now we are not going to allow you to move forward.
Okay. Paul?
My strongest support is for option number 4. I think I said that the other night as well, but I appreciate this analysis and the way you put it together. It does help create a framework where we can talk about it. And so really, and I think I've heard some of my colleagues tonight say, you know, this idea of reducing the geography to the CIP only is interest to a couple people, and I think that was the point of my question before. I think that would really be counter to what we're trying to do. So I'm actually not at all interested in just limiting it to the CIP. But I think, and I know Bill just made a comment too, and we've talked about maybe setting a date for applications, even if is it for all or for just the small projects. I'm not date interested at all. I think it's policy. We have criteria, people, because I think you create an artificial demand. I think mistakes would be made. People might make bad business decisions because there might be date driven. I think the criteria needs to be clear. It needs to be in place without some kind of really what would be an artificial date. There's no way to know exactly what the right and perfect date would be. So I'm not interested in that. I'm most interested in refining and adding a new exception that allows for small projects.
Can we ask questions, Tom? Or no? It's okay. You can say no.
Mary Lou has a question.
Just after, it's very interesting to hear everybody's comments because you heard a lot of different comments. Just a question about number 4. If the only exception were to be made based on this one, this really doesn't capture all the business as usual type ones where you have a business that wants to operate in a house. So it's really not a significant change. It's really just, so it captures a portion of them, but not all of them. So in going with number 4, you would still have some projects that were small in scale, that did not have significant impacts at all, nor met the 6 criteria that would not, that would be held up during the moratorium in number 4. Okay.
Okay? You get some feedback?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm good.
So,
I got a comment, because I'm just looking at things, and I'm not sure I'm matching up the numbers. So under number 4, you said 7 projects of less than 5 or 3,000 foot would be allowed. But I just went and highlighted here, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I'm just wondering if I'm looking at things wrong or not. That's under 3,000 feet and 4 or less residential units.
So did you glom together the non-residential and residential?
Yes.
So 7 and 3 is 10? So
There you
the
go.
non-residential's, so, let's see, number of projects, so, well,
7, you didn't list the residential, no. Yeah, you put 2,800 feet, but there's a
1,
1,300
2,
foot, 1,500 foot, and 2,000 foot
4,
project.
5, 6, so I don't know, I still count 7, Bill. So if we go, number
so-
5,
so wait, so maybe you can do the calculations and then
Sure.
let us know what your conclusion is while we are listening to public comment.
Okay.
Okay?
we can do that.
So, do we have a list that's out here somewhere of public? Yes. We do?
Oh,
Thank you. We just have one?
Oh, I didn't.
Okay. So we have 2. And so, as I said before, we need to move on to another topic at 7. I would like to limit the public comment to 2 minutes and new information. So if you've had an opportunity to talk to the council before, then please limit your comments to new information. And the first person is Joseph Amundsen.
My name is Joseph Amundsen. I live on 22522 Southeast 51st, Issaquah. And I was here last time and made a short comment. I've been here since 1984. I have only one piece of property that half of it is developed and is ready. I sold it to Summit Homes. And the lower part, which is going to give me about 4 or 5 lots, we are not exactly sure, but engineers talking about 5 lots. But if you, go for the short plat, I can just apply for the 4 lots and finish it up. And when I got all the traffic and water and sewer, which was after moratorium that we had a few years ago, I have 32 units of traffic and 32 units of water and sewer for that piece of property. Still is on the one tax lot, and it has not been finalized to give me back the portion which is in lower part. So, and after we finished transaction with the Summit, I started about a year and a half ago working with the engineers. All the wetlands and sensitive areas, engineering has been done, and pre-application has been done about 6-7 months ago. And we were just ready to submit the application, and I got hit by the moratorium. So I don't believe that project is only 4 lots or 5 lots. It's going to do a lot of impact on the city traffic, even if you consider what I had before for the whole project. So I should be entitled to continue with that. And we all know that most of the traffic from the city is not the city traffic. It's just coming from Sammamish and Snoqualmie and Covington and Maple Valley and other, other areas. The big developers are the one coming in and messing up the city, and we have to pay the price for it as a resident of the city. So
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Mr. Power?
Hi, my name is Bob Power, 165 Northeast Juniper Suite, Suite 100, Issaquah, and I'm here to speak in particular about the Gilman Point lofts, but I'm going to say something a little different than I planned on. I apologize for getting here late, and I'll emphasize the regional problem of traffic. I left Bellevue at 5 o'clock this evening. It took me till 6:15 to get here, so that's not a local problem. The 2 points I want to bring up that I probably haven't mentioned before, our project does involve the component of providing some additional mobility enhancements by resolving the intersection issues. And so I guess the one thing I want to talk about tonight that's maybe a little bit different is money. We believe that should you allow this project to move forward, we're going to be funding half the cost of an intersection that's a voluntary improvement not required by a project. Our current project would require us to put a C-curb in Gilman, which would restrict access to all the businesses located on the northeast corner of Gilman. So we'd be contributing $500,000 towards that improvement. And I just did a quick math earlier today. If the project goes ahead, we'll be contributing somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million to traffic mitigation and FAR impact fees. So we think we meet all your criteria, but my last comment is to go to this issue. I think it's been the unintended consequences. We are a developer. We're not a small developer, not a big developer, but we've been doing it for a while, and one of the most important things from our perspective when you go into a jurisdiction, and our home is here, is to have some predictability in the results. And so whether we get singled out or not, I think a big part of this is that people made investments, not just us, but other people, to move forward with a project and took in information that they had and move forward and have financial risk at place. And so to me, considering the fact that people have relied on information they received to move forward is an important consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak who didn't have a chance to sign up? No? Sir? So we don't have a Q&A session tonight, I'm sorry, but perhaps a staff member can get the question from you and perhaps follow up. Okay? It's a council work session, but maybe somebody can talk to you about what your question is.
Is this red district only? Red zone only?
I don't,
Moratorium, red zone only?
No, citywide.
so.
I thought the red zone was the whole deal.
So we don't have a Q&A tonight. We have a work session, and so maybe city staff can talk with you out in the hall for a minute while we continue on. Okay. Okay. So no more public comment. Do any council members have any follow-up comments for Keith, who's now otherwise busy, since hearing public comment? Paul?
I do. In fact, I was, I want to actually amend something I said earlier because it was, I was very clear about number 4, but I did fail to mention, I do find the idea that there is a clearly identifiable kind of public good, say an investment in a transportation or mobility investment that would come with it. I mean, that merits closer investigation. in my mind.
That was number 5.
Because there's we've talked a bit about transportation, as we know, is a key part of this, even though it's technically not. This offers us an this type of criteria does allow us to, I would think, because we, especially once we get architectural review, urban design, parking, things tightened up, if, the transportation benefit is clear, that also helps us address another one of our key issues.
Can I ask Paul a question on that?
Sure, Mary Lou.
So the moratorium didn't take away our ability to negotiate a development agreement anywhere in the city. So that's still there. So if there's somebody brought forward a project with significant community benefit, that's still there.
Okay.
It's an interesting way to frame it, yes.
Tola?
I would have a general preference to not try to do this at the so granular level of looking at individual projects. I understand your point, and I understand that we are looking for community benefit, but I feel like it's incumbent upon us to have a very simple criteria around this moratorium and not get to the point where we're sort of pronouncing, our thumbs up or thumbs down on individual projects. So that's why I like either 4 or a combination of 3 and 4, where we can just say, look, we small projects are exempted just generally, or small projects outside the city core, one or the other, or the central area. Sorry. But generally speaking, that's my preference as we look to move forward.
Thank you. Any other follow-up comments since hearing from the public tonight?
That's a process question?
Yes.
So what can we expect for November 7th?
Keith?
So I'm going to keep one of my wandering eyes at the city attorney. I think what I'm expecting to do is to update the agenda bill, provide a recommendation to the city council based on what I heard the majority of the council support this evening. And that would also, I think, translate into a red line on the ordinance. So we would provide that as an attachment to the agenda bill. I think I'm going to go ahead and take a step out onto the porch and say, based on the conversations you guys had on the 17th, I would also propose that the one-year work plan, I heard that the 6-month didn't make sense. I would go ahead and say that let's maybe schedule a follow-up public hearing on the moratorium in November of 2017. And either at that point you would evaluate whether or not the work plan was sufficiently completed, or continue the moratorium, and we would make a follow-up decision at that point. So that's, I think, what the agenda bill would generally say, and hopefully there would be enough connectivity in the updated section that makes that all make sense.
Thank you.
Stacy? So I get so busy trying to figure out what we're going to do next that I had some thoughts about the work plan proposals in here. One is that to me it seemed they're still a little unclear. To me, it says, kind of what we would accomplish in each one of these 6, 12, and 15 months. But to me, it seems like we need an actual timeline with the proposed process, with maybe the preliminary public meeting schedule. And I'm not in favor at all of shortcutting the public process. And I also think that we need to know that timeline information so that we'll be able to budget for that for next year, because the process seems to really important in terms of how it drives the costs.
So I'll unpack all of that for you as an additional attachment to the updated agenda bill.
Okay.
And that way we can also have a conversation about the deliverables and the process and outreach that would be accompanying each one of those work plan elements. so that way you can give some feedback back to staff on that. Or that could be, maybe one of the alternatives for council as part of the motion would be to refer the work plan to Land and Shore for a more in-depth conversation.
Yeah, keeping in mind that we're budgeting right now.
We are budgeting right now.
So we are budgeting.
Trying to get
Like
you to
in a
that,
minute,
actually.
budgeting.
Yeah. All right? Good to go? Okay,
All right.
thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for members of the public who came. Appreciate that.
One last question clarifying that you and I left.
Yeah.
I see the error is that you had 2,800 square feet of commercial, and it should have been 4,800, if I'm right
Oh.
there. Seven projects and 3 projects for 4,800 square feet of commercial.
Okay.
That's where I was at 2,800, so that's where I got lost.
Okay.
So check
you.
my numbers and make sure I'm right.
So now we were going to move on to the next agenda item, which is the our third budget work session. And we're scheduled to go till 9, and we will go only till 9, starting with answers to council questions. And I believe those start on page of the packet. We'll find it here. $233.
33, not 257?
Okay, so we are going to go through these questions. I'm going to assume that everybody's read the questions and the answers, more importantly, the answers. And that if anybody has follow-up questions, you can do that. So the first one is question number 12. Asks, other than Issaquah,
Can
Hobart.
we get it up here as well?
Sure. Somebody can do that. Other than the Issaquah Hobart Road Study, current improvements to streets in North Issaquah, complete streets, et cetera, how does this budget address traffic congestion, local and/or regional? In other words, is there anything in the budget for specific and physical improvements that address traffic congestion immediately, rather than things that are still years away? And so there are I asked the question, and I don't have any questions about the answer. Does anybody else?
President,
Yes.
if it's possible, just throw it out there for your consideration. As we go through these questions, if there's something that you'd like to add to the deliberation
Yes.
list, say there's something specifically in here, we could track that, and then it may be an efficient way to start to put together that list.
Yes. Good suggestion. Emily?
I'll just add that there are a couple other, I believe, related transportation questions that we're working to answer right now. Perhaps one of those is a question that I think we're responding directly to a council member on. Know that if you've asked, we still have those in the works, and I expect one of those will be transmitted to you on Friday.
Okay. So question number 13. Maybe we can share the fun here. And so the person that asked the question can guide the conversation.
That's a good idea.
So, Councilmember Winterstein, number 13. Do you have
Can I ask you to come back to me?
Yes.
Circle back on that one, thank you.
number 14? Why is pool revenue low? I think that's Paul's as well.
Yeah, if I may ask for a little deferment here.
Sure.
Please.
List of council goals with budgeted items and amounts.
I'll just add that this is a question that was posed by a few different council members and slightly different ways and some overlaps, and so we actually combined a few questions. So it's council goals, moratorium-related items, and all studies.
I did have a question on this one.
Okay, go ahead.
Emily, can you scroll down to the council goals? I think the one I wrote down here, and maybe it's for deliberations, is why the master mobility plan isn't funded. Or is it?
It is not. I did list that as an item because you had raised it in a separate conversation
There,
to try to
got it.
provide
Yep.
clarity that we do not have anything budgeted. The reason we do not have anything budgeted is council took action to actually repurpose the money from 2016 and direct us to do the transportation funding strategy that ultimately became the bond measure.
Yep.
And we had not had any subsequent conversations with council as to when you
When
wanted
to
us
bring
to
that
pick
back.
up this.
So I would just not necessarily want to talk about it now, but maybe add it to the deliberations list since it's unfunded right now.
The mobility master plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, my microphone's too far away. Thanks, Mary.
Okay,
So mine was to add to the deliberations list, the master mobility plan, and it's currently unfunded in the budget, and I'd like to get the council members to talk about that. Yes, second question, Emily, was this the place where the mayor's list of transportation ones were listed, or is that in a different answer?
It's in a different answer,
Okay.
and
Okay.
maybe my colleagues can scroll through and see if it
No, it's
was
okay,
in
we'll
this
get to it.
batch or not. I have told a few of you I'm living in too many different time periods right now, and I lose track of which answers have gone into which packet,
Mhm.
or which are still in progress.
Mariah?
Emily, on the, and correct me if this is somewhere else, but on the neighborhood engagement program, the amount in the budget, again, it includes salary, benefits, and materials and supplies, but not necessarily projects or plans that the neighborhood engagement coordinator would work on.
Sure, so if I anticipate your question, there's another Q&A response that's been provided.
right,
I think it was in this group.
That's
that
what I missed.
explains the intent of that pilot program, and it speaks to the timeline that you will have for kind of reviewing the outcomes and making a determination as to whether or not that should be a permanent program.
Okay.
Any other questions for,
I have one, Stacy.
okay, Eileen?
Regional agenda, can you just define what this is for me? It says first full year of position, is this a new position?
Correct. You authorized that a few months ago, and we're in the process of filling that position right now.
Okay.
Anything else on that? Okay, so I'm, well, I'm going to just skip right over this DSD budget policy brief right now. And go to question number 18. Wanted information on Salmon Run Nature Park. So
Yes.
there is before and after pictures of what it looks like. Do a little daylighting here. Does anybody have any questions on it? Bill, I
No.
think it was yours.
No, wasn't mine.
If
It wasn't?
Stacy, if I
Was it
might
mine?
just take a,
Mine.
just a couple
I
minutes.
think it was you.
Sheldon is here precisely for this item, and if he could maybe
Oh,
just verbalize a little bit on these slides, because that was a request from council, that would be lovely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is this on? There we go. I'll have to lean forward.
Yeah,
I
you have
remember
to
from
turn-
last time. So I'm going to scroll back up here real quick to the first slide. And just a reminder that Salmon Run Nature Park is at the intersection of 5th Avenue Northwest and Juniper Street. And it is also part of the Green Necklace as adopted by the City Council in the Central Issaquah Plan. Salmon Run Nature Park was a project that before looked like the two pictures that you see up there now. Poor habitat for fisheries and other wildlife along the riparian corridor. The banks were hardened with rocks and things like that to keep erosion down from cutting the banks. And also in this area, there's some flooding that's caused by Issaquah Creek. When it floods, Goodman Village would get water in it, and so there's a flooding aspect to this project as well. As part of the Green Necklace, you can see that before pictures, essentially there's no public access, no public viewing. So that was the before picture. And when we talk about funding for this project, the project was funded through King County Flood Control District funds, as well as the King County Cooperative Watershed Management Grant Program. Between the two, there's roughly $750,000 of grant money that came in to fund this project. From a public engagement perspective, website was created for the project. There were social media pushes about the project. We did some letters to the neighbors as construction approached, as well as there was a video created by the city's Tim Smith and the communications group and posted on the website as well. There's a sign that was posted as part of the project for during construction. And then we've actually had a couple of Eagle Scouts do their projects there. And with that, photos were taken, and those were also posted on the social media and so forth to not only give credit to the Eagle Scouts, but also help the promotion of the project. Now we look at the project, and what we see is substantially improved habitat. The bank hardening is gone. The blackberries are gone. And what we've got is a series of riffles and pools, large woody debris to create habitat and pools for fishery. We have a back channel for when there's high flows, the fish have a place to have some refuge from the very fast-moving water. And also, you can notice that it's quite open now for the public to be able to see it, view it, and enjoy it as part of the Green Necklace. Public engagement continues with this. In that Mountains of Sound Greenway, you'll notice that there's a substantial area that has not yet been planted for habitat and other reasons. And Mountains of Sound Greenway will be doing volunteer events there to do those plantings. And those will have substantial public engagement as solicitations for volunteers and things like that go. So that's then and now for Salmon Run Nature Park.
Next, one comment? Mm-hmm. And Sheldon, there is a budget item this year as well for planting for this one? It shows up in one spot in our 2017 budget, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Sheldon.
Can I just comment one? I attended the Kokanee Work Group meeting this afternoon, and this project came up and in regards to the tremendous value that this now has for the Kokanee coming upstream and for those fry. Their intent is to use this facility or this park more than we've been able to in the past because of the great attributes we have here now for habitat and in some releases that they are looking at. So it's wonderful to have this back as an absolute treasure again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, let's flip back to 13, question 13.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
So thank you for the information. First, let me say, yeah, I have it electronically. Thanks. So I would just ask that I think this is, if it could become a standard part of kind of just status report, if nothing else. I think it's very, very important. So there's a lot more information here than I realized. There's a lot more. I didn't realize there were unencumbered funds there, but I did wonder where kind of like the nearly $1 million for the Human Services Campus resided. Now I know it sits in the mitigation fund and it's not committed anywhere. It's not encumbered. But these, and so let me understand this. So if I read this right, that currently street will have nearly $4 million at the end of the year. Now, what this doesn't show is mitigation funds used for transportation or street during 2017. This is just the ending balance. Or actually, I take that back. I said that wrong. The next column, the first year estimated 2017, is that the spend? So will I find 1.224 million in spend in transportation in the 2017 budget? How am I to read this? Is that correct? Because when I said kind of aging, it's like, okay, we have some money in there and we know that it ages, right? We have to spend it within a certain window of time. So how much must we spend in the next year?
So if you look at, it's 1 through 10 in terms of the amounts.
Mm-hmm.
And so the one that's most at risk right now would be, if you look at the fire on the far right, it's in the 9th year, $279,933. So when we do an appropriation, because these are essentially cash balances or fund balance, and then we track the year that it comes in, we go first dollar spent is the oldest dollar amount. So say we bought a new fire truck and we used the fire mitigation funds for that, and that truck was $500,000. The first amount that would get spent would be the $279,933, then the $89,22, and then the $412.
Okay, so
portion of that.
Okay, so my question was, what has to be spent within the next year, and then what has to be spent within the next 2 years? And this has a limit of 10, and I think if I read that, then we have to go, because it appears like in transportation or street has to be spent within 5 years of being received?
The first $500,000.
So instead of where it says fifth year 2013, okay, fifth year 2013 that is what we have to spend now.
So the fifth
in the next year. It's kind of confusing.
Yeah, so the 5th year, 2013, that was how much money we received that year. That's that we still have, that's available to spend.
Available to spend.
Available.
And if we
spend.
don't?
Then it would switch into the 6th year column. So what happens
It's not
then?
at risk.
Yeah, so what happens is once you hit year 11, you actually have to refund the individuals that, the developers that paid those mitigation funds back to those developers or individuals.
So if I could turn this around and say, start from the far right and say, over this next year, no transportation funds are at risk to be returned, and nothing within the next 2 years, or the 3 years, or 4 years, or 5 years. But once we get to 6 years out, we better have spent that 519.
Right.
That's the way I was asking about it. I was trying to understand what we are compelled to actually use. And what might be at risk, as well as, the overall balance that we had, so that we could just keep that in consideration. I didn't know what the street balance was before, and all of that. And so now, to your point, you're saying not within the next year, but within 2 years. Again, I'm reading now right from left. We have to spend $279,933 out of fire mitigation, or we have to return it.
That's correct.
And then, okay.
Paul, can I ask a follow-up
So
question?
we can actually, yeah, go ahead. I have some more.
Okay. So does, on the other funds not aged, the 246,227 in the 10th year, does that have to be spent this year or not?
Is that in the bottom?
Bottom.
So essentially what those are, now we're using a broad definition of mitigation. So they were mitigation for some purpose. So in
lieu of?
In lieu of, yeah. So essentially the best example of that, because we've talked a lot, is the Human Services Campus. So that was actually, there was a requirement in the development agreement for the developer to build a certain amount of affordable housing. And so they mitigated that. They essentially bought out of that requirement by providing us with $1 million, which the council at that time set into the mitigation fund for Human Services Campus. But the origination of that was actually for affordable housing. So the mitigate, but there is no aging on that.
So the 246, 227 does not have to be spent this year in the far column on 10th year.
That's right.
Okay. And then the other question was, what are we spending this year? I guess is that one of your questions?
Well,
Oh, sorry. What are we
yeah,
spending this year?
the other funds, I don't understand the aging on that at all, because there is no obligation. So the fact that you have it spread out like that, that's a curiosity. I just look at those are collected in lieu of funds, and we, can use as we see appropriate, or when we see appropriate. Is that, I mean, there really is no aging, so I'm not sure why it shows aging.
I think it just is, so aging really applies to that's why it says other funds not age, so.
Then it shows aging buckets.
It's just when, it's really like when those funds got recorded or were received. So, I mean, part of that
I
is,
see.
from an accountability standpoint,
see.
we said we got $1 million in affordable housing in 2009, and now we're 8 years out, and we haven't spent it. And so we've talked about the fact, as a city, that this is a priority, and we got some funds available, we're not meeting that goal.
Okay, so those are the years they were collected?
Yes.
Okay, all right, and that's really kind of what they all are, the years that they were collected, but you work right from left to understand what we're obligated to spend.
Exactly.
So if
Thank you for that.
So if we were to, so let's look at 5th year 2013 street, 519, 398. Do we also know from which projects those funds came?
Yes.
Okay.
Because we have to track it to reimburse the developer if we end up not spending those monies.
Right. So do all of the, do all of the ones that do age, is it always a 10-year runway? I didn't realize it was 10.
Yes.
I thought they had different runways. Okay. That's good. This kind of clarifies something I had a misunderstanding on. I thought perhaps parks versus police versus street maybe had different time horizons in which we had to spend it. So I like the information. It's kind of, I'll spend a little bit more time with it, but it's the visibility as much as anything, and I think and you pointed out, Bob, man, fire does kind of jump out there.
So, yeah, we've had conversations in the past. I know
We never saw this. Yeah,
yes, exactly. Yeah. So I think the great thing is, we've continued to talk to the fire chief about opportunity and enhanced service with potentially a new station. Mm-hmm. And so you can see the Maple Street station was approximately $6.2 million. So if we, by accumulating these mitigation funds, we're about halfway to the cost of a new station, just if we were to dedicate the full amount, to a new station, for example, for mitigation, with using mitigation funds.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So, so you can add these, correct? So you can add 5th year 519 to 4th to 3rd to 2nd to come up with, is that money available?
The money the money in the second column, which it says the balance, that's the cash available.
All of that's available per each of those uses.
Yes, so it's not.
Right now.
It's not.
Where? Can you
it's not
point?
in the budget.
1231,
Some of
2017
it in
estimated balance.
That's the full amount
So
that's
the parks,
available
for
now.
example, we got how much in there?
Then you read right.
That's the
where that-
estimated balance for the end of next year.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Of
That's
all of those different ones from year 1 through 9.
I'm just looking at the street one, so.
Yeah.
That takes into account the 2017 budget.
Correct.
So at the beginning of 2017, there'll be 1.224, and at the end, 3.893.
No.
No.
That's
So,
just what we're taking in.
So we didn't do a rolling cash balance.
Okay.
But if you could figure that out by, you added columns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Thank you, there with the cursor. And that would get you to what the cash balance was. I mean, essentially it went up by, was that 1224, what we're estimating into the next
Well, I
year?
just added
Yes.
you could also come up with any total. You could add 2, 3, 4, and 5, which I did, was just a little more than 1.6. And that's available. It's not in danger of being refunded. Okay? Parks. I was surprised that Parks was so low.
That is because if you look on section 724, the Park Construction Fund, we were transferring money from the mitigation in 2017 for the parks projects that were budgeted.
Okay.
So
We're spending it.
we're spending it, and so that the amount that was budgeted reduced the cash balance.
That's essentially Confluence Park and
Central Park.
Central Park, right? So that big chunk is going out, and that's interesting to know, because when we talk about, oh, we're increasing the size of Central Park, and we're going to use all this mitigation funds for it because we have it, and then you realize, yes, but we're using it all up, and now we're down to basically nothing. So the next project doesn't have that available to it. That's the thing that, by seeing this, realizes when you're spending those down and say, oh, yeah, we have it, but how far you're going down is very important to know.
So
Approving those kinds of things.
So where will it show in Parks? I guess if we were going to spend it in 2017, I would have expected to see some.
Yeah, sure, the pay.
Some
It was
total.
reviewed during the capital
No,
budget review.
I know it's in here. I guess I will.
Yep.
I can ask my
Oh, on
question
the
off the-
spreadsheet itself.
So all of those are the amount taken in those respective years.
I get it. I
Don't
get
show the
that.
spend, yeah.
I get that. So I'll ask offline.
I have a question.
Sure.
So we approved a overage on Confluence Park of $400,000. Did that come out of Parks mitigation from 2016? Where'd that money come from?
So I'll have to get back to you, because I don't
Okay.
recall if it came out of mitigation, do you remember, or if it came out of fund and balance?
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd have to
no,
look back.
I'll just get an answer to
Sure,
it.
it's mitigation.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions on this one?
Yeah.
Bob?
No, I was just going to say, so the one thing we got to, and I know we've talked about this a million times, but they're growth-related projects. So that's the biggest thing on the restriction that we have on this. So when you look at financing projects in different ways, as long as there's a growth component that you can tie back to the mitigation funds, there's opportunities to use mitigation for that.
One of the reasons I was asking if we keep the data on from which projects we receive those funds is because I'm wondering if there is an opportunity to look and see where those funds came from, and then if there are projects in that, if there are opportunities in that vicinity to spend that money, it seems like,
You should consider it.
yeah, that's why I asked. That's the Issaquah Hobart Road question. I guess there's not a lot of development on Issaquah Hobart Road, but growth south, folks have asked where are the impact fees being spent? Okay, any other questions? Great.
Oh, actually, I do. As I look at the parks and I'm thinking about that, so it shows that basically there's no money there. It hasn't been any collected for a number of years. I mean, there's all blanks on that line except for estimated in 2017 of $1,000.
That's my question.
So if I'm reading that thing the way you just described it, that fund's broke. Because there's, the only amount in there is what we estimate we'll gather in 2017. And we talked about Central Park taking a lot of mitigation money to fund that, so where's that money?
Can you say that again?
Okay.
I think it was the question I asked earlier, and the explanation of where the money's being spent is on section 724. Is that right? No, sorry.
this
It's in the
shows-
budget yeah.
That's the amount that's being
seven-
transferred out of the mitigation fund to Parks Construction. So
720.
this amount is the cash balance left over after we receive money in 2017, and then we transfer the balance over to the Parks Construction Fund for.
I think I got it.
But
This
this
is
is revenue. This is what we
for
should have
parks.
collected in the Parks Mitigation Fund.
Less what's already been planned to spend in 2017.
But in these other years, it doesn't show that we've gathered any money.
Spending.
Because we're so that's why I think what I just said is, what it reflects is it's what we've collected less what we're spending in
So
2017.
it could be in there, but then you spent it.
took it back
So
out
now
because
you
we're
don't see
spending
it.
it.
It's already gone.
Already
So
in.
Yes.
when we was requested to do an aging report, we just did the cash balance and we aged it, and we netted the revenues and expenditures. There's a different view where you actually go year by year. This is the revenue we got in, and this is the amount we spent. And I think that's what you're asking for, is that different viewpoint. But it's not on the, it's, this was more of an aging versus a in and an out.
All right.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's move on to question 14.
Very helpful, thank you.
And the question is, why is pool revenue low? Short answer?
Yeah, I don't have any, thanks for the answer.
Any questions about that? Follow-up? Okay, moving on to 15. Provide an analysis of Parks Department budget comparing 2017 budget to 2016 estimated actual, not to 2016 budget. I don't know whose question this was. So I will just ask if anybody has any questions about the answer. Okay. 16 we already went through. Can we leave number 17 to last, please?
Yes.
And maybe we'll run out of time. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, number 18. We did that one. Number 19, finance. Bill, I think this was yours. Explain what charges for services can consist of. Perhaps provide an example.
That's exactly my question, but I did have a charges and services question. This lists all the things on there. My question had a lot more. And so I don't know if this is my question or somebody else asked it.
I think it's been subsequently asked in a slightly different way by two council members, and we'll respond to that separately from this response. This response was...
Is there another place that gets more in-depth answer than this? Or should I bring my question in now? That's my question. Okay, I'll wait. I can wait, no problem.
Okay. Number 20. Provide a description of the security camera project.
This is certainly useful information. I'd really like to understand how we get to $150,000 for 43 cameras. This has been an ongoing thing from services that I continue to have a hard time understanding why it's so much money. So it would help very much to understand how much of it is hardware. I realize there's monitors inside. There's a lot of different hardware aspects to it. But I'm sure there's a reason for it, but I just want to know what that reason is.
So is that a follow-up question that you have about?
I just want to amend this with budget, with actual costs associated with the project. When I think of getting a description of a project, I generally mean to include the budget of a project.
So you want more information?
Yeah, just the costs associated with it. What's labor? What's hardware? What's maintenance? That kind of stuff. The same way we sometimes do with we do this sometimes with software projects in the city, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm sure there's a good reason. I just want to understand what that reason is.
Okay.
It looks like a good project. I just need to get more comfortable with the money.
You don't have to justify yourself so much. You can ask a question. 21.
Yep, $250,000. So my question is, will we be including that in our a la carte list of options to consider when we go to deliberations?
Yes.
Awesome.
Who said yes?
So I just,
Wait.
That was Councilmember Whitney's time.
Wait, who said yes?
so can you, just for clarity's sake, Emily, describe what the 250 buys?
Sure, this is the design phase of the signal and the traffic circle and crossing improvements and the fiber connection that enables it to be, the signal to be connected to our software system.
But not construction.
Right.
That's correct.
You got to walk before you run.
So this is all design.
So the signal then would come in like 2018 if it got funded
That's correct.
at that time.
Oh, I want to ask one thing on this, and I want to say it with a smile on my face and a joy in my heart. We have learned things from the skate park on budgeting and on reserves. And I would hope that we would factor those in on something like this. This one is going to be, tough because it's going to be a bunch of money, right? And it's going to be something that the community is going to want. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of the skate park. So I just want to make sure that we err on the side of, fiscal caution, so we don't have to keep, I'm sure you guys don't want to keep coming back to us for supplemental funding on something like this anyhow, but I just thought I'd mention it.
I reciprocate that joy, indeed. Lessons learned.
And just to be clear, it's not in the budget now at all.
Correct.
Okay,
That's why I
just
said I would like it on the olive.
Right, just
So
making.
Yeah, so we'll refer to this as the Park Drive signalization.
Okay. 22. What additional projects could be added to complete streets if an additional 300,000 was put in the budget? Who's claiming?
I think that's just what we tried to do is provide a menu rather than say, here's the projects, that here's some options, right? That could be considered.
Correct.
Because if you added them all up, it would be close to 500,000, 600,000, 700,000.
So not being in infrastructure, do you guys have a list of projects like this? And this is just some of them? Or no? Who's on infrastructure?
Stacy, Bill, and I.
And Bill. Like, is this familiar to you? No?
For 2017, no. No, we haven't seen this yet.
Or a longer list that these three were on?
We have an inventory of a sidewalk inventory. That's the only list that I have.
Okay.
And so we get this proposal. This is the first we're seeing what's
Okay.
proposed for 2017.
Sometimes from a budgeting and process standpoint, usually it's been like a bulk allocation, and then we come back in the spring, have a conversation with the committee on some of the projects and how the allocation would be spent. So I think we would have that. These are just additional ones that we'd be looking at beyond what we thought we were going to do for next year.
Correct.
And whose question is this?
I thought it was yours.
Nope. And the reason I ask is because I know there's a line item in the budget that talks about additional revenue from the speed enforcement cameras in the amount of 510,000. And I was wondering if that's why somebody was asking a question or not.
That one was mine, and the
Okay.
last one was mine.
Okay, because that is just showing I don't believe that one's showing as being spent next year, just collected. Just,
510?
yeah.
So what we did was essentially put the 510 into the account, and then we took 510 out. So the general fund and the capital fund stayed the same.
It's called sleight of hand.
But we haven't allocated the 510 for projects.
It's just, no, so it's in, essentially it's in the fund. But because we took sales tax out, essentially both funds are what they were at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
We didn't collect an extra $510,000. We just put it in a different pot.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right, and I believe the intent when council was talking about it was that that 510 would be expended on safety improvements. So that's why I was asking if
Yeah.
whoever asked this question was thinking that we would expend it on safety improvements. But the two numbers are different. This is 300.
I would just say there's complete streets budget, and then
Yeah.
there's other capital projects in the capital fund. And so I could make an argument that that is being spent on safety improvements. And just to clarify, the way that this question was asked or posed, as I recall it, was if we're carrying over money for complete streets, 200,000, and we have $100,000 set aside for potential traffic calming in the Sunset neighborhoods. If we still wanted to do those things but do new
That was my
complete
question,
streets
right.
projects,
Right.
could you suggest some? And so we took that same $300,000 allocation that is currently in the proposed budget, and we
And added
said,
projects.
yeah, give some examples of projects that could be considered.
Okay. And I think that was based on me thinking that a carryover plus traffic calming meant we didn't get much done last year.
Yes.
So do that work and do new complete street projects.
Okay.
Okay, makes sense.
Question before we move on. So actually, as we talk about these we identified this would come out, please identify the fund. This would be street fund. Complete streets out of the street fund?
Yeah, the same, we would have to identify the revenue source. It would be the same source of revenue that we currently use for complete streets unless there was a desire to do something different.
So the,
Such as
So
do it out of
we
general
haven't
fund, if we
identified a
chose.
revenue source, but.
Okay, so let me put it another way then. If it is related to a specific fund, clearly, just identify that for me as we're keeping track of all of these deliberation items.
can I add on to that a little bit? I think where I was coming from was that if we're just moving money from this year because we didn't do work to next year, that means we didn't get things done this year. So if we want to demonstrate progress on complete streets, that doesn't really count. We ought to be actually doing that, moving the funds forward and adding additional funds to carry on with improvements. Otherwise, we're losing ground every year. We're just moving the money forward, not doing the work. And so there is no revenue source for this. This was
Yeah.
just a what if.
Well, if I said revenue, I misspoke. I meant the source of the funds. Which fund would the money come from?
We haven't deliberated that yet. If you wanted to do it, we haven't talked about it yet.
If it, yeah, right.
Yeah.
No. But normally, Complete Streets comes out of,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It would sit in the
Yeah.
fund, so since it's carryover, it would be residing in that.
so the spend for this year is really, it's in the same fund. It's carryover from last year because we didn't expend it. So this asks the question, if we did more, give me some examples.
Right.
And so we can deliberate if we want to do this and then how to pay
Right.
for it.
I don't like the word more, though, because to me, when we budgeted in 1 year and say, we're going to do some complete street projects, but we don't do them, and we
Well,
just
more than
need the
was
money for
proposed.
it?
I
Yeah.
agree with you.
Okay.
It's just more than what was
Yes,
proposed.
correct.
You're absolutely right. I agree with your
It's a
perspective
catch-
100%.
Yep.
Sort of a catch-up.
Let me also just clarify for the record that we budgeted to do more last year than we typically do in a year.
Right. I think that was intentional, though.
It
On-
was,
on our
it was.
part.
I just want to,
Yeah. Yeah. The
we
money went up
didn't,
last year.
from a historical perspective,
Yep.
we spent the same amount we often do. We got done a lot more work than we typically do because there were so many small projects that were undertaken in Complete Streets last year.
That's right.
Okay, so are we adding anything to deliberations at this time for that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, number 23. The budget request includes $100,000 for the long-term options study, which is Agenda Bill 7183, and additional $200,000. Please explain what the $200,000 will be used for. This, just so everybody knows what we're talking about, particularly, it doesn't even have the word water in here. But it is for a long-term water treatment plant. And it's to study the options. So,
I'm sorry, which line, I was totally confused reading this. Which line item of the construction project description list to which does it refer? Is it the $350,000 South Cove Greenwood Point Systems improvement?
Okay.
So which one is it? It doesn't say.
We'll need to find the page reference, but it is the long-term water
811.
treatment. So think treatment plant for the future.
I think, so help me here a little bit, but if I remember right, we were originally we asked for a budget allocation this year, we're going to do an amendment. And then it went to committee, and the committee said, if we're almost at the end of the year and we won't get anything
anyway.
significant done in November, December anyway, why don't we just kick the request into the 2017 budget deliberations? So it would have come out of ending fund balance for this year. This, what essentially this does is, because it's not, you won't find it in the budget because it wouldn't have been a 2017 spend.
The $100,000
Yeah.
portion of it. The
Correct.
200 and then a separate 50 are in there. The 200 is for the design by this answer, and the 50 was for the water system update.
Okay.
So the 100 is the additional.
So as I look on page 8-11, water construction projects list, construction project description, which is the reference there, which line items are we talking about?
Water treatment plant.
That's 300. Where's the other 50?
I don't know whether,
So it was confusing at infrastructure. What we heard was that the 100 was in the 2016 budget and the rest of it would be in 2017. In the last budget meeting we had, we heard that that was not accurate, is what I recall hearing, and the entire 300's in 2017.
Where it says water treatment plant?
Yep.
So did he put?
That's correct.
All right.
Okay.
Does that?
Yes.
You get that? Okay. So there is really no additional add that's
Right.
already in here. The 50 is just somewhere else.
Right. Well, I don't know what the 50 is about. We've never talked about another 50.
Yeah, that's the water system,
It's in the
Oh,
water
the
fund,
water
not the water
system.
construction
Sorry.
fund.
water fund, not construction, yeah,
Okay.
right.
Mary Lou?
Yeah, I have a couple concerns with this. So I think okay, I'll start from the part of the water plan that was at infrastructure. What's it called? I can't remember.
The water system plan
Water
update.
system plan update or something that we don't have yet, that is a 6-year rolling plan. You make the plan and then you update it every 6 years. We don't have it. The current plan we have now needs to be updated. I think there's money to update it, but it doesn't have a water treatment plant in it. And then now we have a budget with a dollar amount to start treatment plant design or pre-design or whatever you want. And I feel like it's cart before the horse. I think moving from not treating your water to treating your water is a big decision. It's a lot of money. I think the budget should have money. Maybe we should have an account where we are over a period of time allocating more money so that we build up the $1 million or whatever it is we need. But to just start studying something right now didn't make sense to me. So that's sort of why I'm kind of hung up on this one. I just feel like I don't have a problem with putting money aside, but I still have a lot of questions about this. So we can just talk about it more at deliberations.
Tola?
I totally understand and I guess concur with that. Additionally, I'm wondering, treatment process, does that get at the question of whether the fraction of the city that is chlorinated versus nothing?
Yes.
Okay, which is an issue that is, people have many feelings on, right? It's beyond a
We need a
typical
lot more
engineering issue.
conversations. And I feel like authorizing money right now for pre-design, I don't think we've had enough conversations yet.
So I've added that to the deliberation
Deliberations.
Thank you.
list that I'm maintaining. 200,000.
The-
100,000 is to do the initial long-term options study, and the 200 is on here, which is the pre-design, that get it to 20 to 30%. Is that
You know,
your
I
ask?
would say all 300,000, to be honest. We're in the process of investigating a
PFAS.
water quality issue, and we don't have that data. We don't even have a plan for how we're going to collect all of that data. I feel like there's a lot of unknowns, and I'm not sure that we've talked enough about it yet. So leave all the money. I'm fine with leaving it in the budget. I am not fine with progressing until infrastructure has had more discussions over it and is more comfortable with it.
Okay, so we've got the 300 on the deliberations list. '24, provide examples of enhanced customer service actions mentioned in mayor's remarks at the recent council meeting.
That's me.
Okay?
And I guess that's a good answer. A lot of stuff in here, but I don't know if I could still distill what I was trying to come from is that enhanced customer service to me means as a resident or a business owner walking into City Hall, something's different. You know, I pay my bill online, I do whatever, and I'm still not sure that I understand what the differences are in the customer service experience in 2017. Because I know we're going to get, for example, pay utility bills. Are we paying utility bills online? Is that module live online, or is the dollars in here to get the module installed?
To get the module designed and
So they're not-
installed.
no-
So that the timeline for
2018.
when, as we discussed offline,
Yeah.
the timeline for when the public will see that is not totally determined. It's going to be how
Okay.
quickly we can progress on that module.
And the same with the Parks and Rec? Not necessarily 2017?
They're I'm not sure, but I believe the desire is to try to have something in place and customers experiencing that by the end of 2017. They're moving toward selection of that software and firm right now.
Okay. So It's fine. It's a good answer.
Do we have a budget question or a budget?
No.
Okay. 25? Provide the costs for 2017 traffic congestion actions listed in the mayor's remarks at a recent council meeting.
I think several of us did it, but I could walk through this one if you want. So this was the September 6th list. The mayor read it, I think, during his comments that night. And I just wanted to see where it was in the budget. Yeah, I did have a question on this one, sorry.
Okay.
And I think it had to do with the speed enforcement.
The what?
Is speed enforcement in here?
Yeah,
Yes,
it's number
this
5.
Okay.
Or was it enhanced traffic enforcement, the next one? So I will ask a related question while Mary Lou's thinking, and that is, I didn't actually ask this question as a budget question, but I'm sure Bob or Emily can address it. One of the questions I was going to ask, or thinking about asking, was adding a position to the police department, which would be specifically a traffic enforcement officer, or whatever you call that officer. And so what pros and cons with that? Why would we want to or not want to add an officer that was dedicated to traffic enforcement?
We have one in the budget now. The problem we've had, and the chief would tell you, is we're trying to get the full staffing. So patrol is the #1 priority. And so what happens is we've been short on patrol officers to do patrol, and ends up getting pulled, that traffic safety officer ends up getting pulled into the patrol schedule, cover vacations and vacancies and those types of things. If we can get our department to full staffing, then we'd be able to essentially have that allocated individual who's doing traffic safety there full-time. So what's occurring now is for that approximately 0.4 time that's kind of missing, is it either gets done on overtime, through special traffic enforcement, or it doesn't get done.
Well, I'm talking about a new position that's not 0.4 spent on traffic enforcement. It's spending one full-time officer is on that.
So there is one full-time
Now?
officer in the budget.
It's just not filled.
Well, it's filled. The problem has been we've had
Vacancies.
vacancies, and so we have to pull that officer off of traffic, and he ends up filling the schedule to cover patrol. So if we can get, and so it starts to get into, we've had retirements, and you'll see actually our expenses for police salaries are down quite a bit this year, and it's primarily because of vacancies.
Right.
And then the second thing challenge we've had is getting people through the state police academy. So that's why we've been trying to hire laterals, but those have been getting more and more challenging to hire too.
Okay. Thanks.
But the interesting thing is, if you want more enforcement, until we can get that full-time, we can get the fully staffed, what we can do is add some money to the budget for overtime. And so we can do special overtime assignments that would help make up for, what you're asking for, because it kind of goes outside the schedule.
Well, how long has the vacancy problem been going on? Just the entire year or longer? Or maybe I wasn't listening, sorry.
No, it's okay. So it's been years. So I think that's one of the things we've talked about in the past is, it seems like, we have a desired force number, I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. And the challenge is, getting to that number. So one of the things we talked about is, well, what if we change that force number, say, by 2 officers up, but you actually funded it at a level below that, because we never seem to hit that actual number. Then there may be, because
Money there to spend it
there
on.
may be a way to actually get there. Because we know, we generally know there's going to be a certain number of retirements that happen on a regular basis. And so that may be an option.
Another
to
option.
Get
Okay.
there.
Thank you.
I remember my comment.
Okay.
So for deliberations, I guess in my mind, when the mayor presented the list, I assumed that we would be working on these in 2017. So everything that's TBD up there, I would like to talk about at deliberations, because right now it means there's no money for them. So that is tolling, red light cameras, speed enforcement, Issaquah Transportation Advisory Committee, and then the one I would add is that depending on where we want to fit it in, if master mobility is not already on the deliberations list, to me, it ties in with this as well.
Okay.
So could you do those again real quick? Tolling, red light cameras?
The ones that don't have any funding in 2017 are tolling possibilities, red light cameras, speed enforcement, contract and installation, Issaquah's Transportation Advisory Committee. That's it.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Moving on to 26. Neighborhood engagement program description, funding breakdown, and what citizens will see. So, someone asked to see a funding breakdown and what citizens will see, and a description of the neighborhood engagement program. And I don't know who that was.
Was that yours one, Bill, or? I don't remember either.
I think I had a follow-up question to it, but.
So why don't you take it? 'Cause I don't remember, it was both.
So we have a description here. Do you have?
No, go ahead.
We,
I believe it was Mary Lou's, but.
Was it me? Okay.
I'd have to go back and check my notes.
Well, this came from the goal that you and I shared on neighborhood, right? Can I ask Stacy?
Yeah.
Can I get a little bit of history? When did we enact that goal, and why? We enacted it more than a year ago, right? But we're doing it now?
Tola, I'd have to check. I believe we enacted it in 15 to be incorporated into the 16 budget, and it was meant to be an 18-month program. So, and that's where I hesitate, because the 6 months was either at the end of 15 or was the first half of 17. I think it was the first half of 17, but that's how it was designed as a goal.
Thank you.
yeah, Mariah.
So I think part of this is where my question had come from earlier, that we've got this budgeted for salary, benefits, and some of the supplies and outreach, but I think that this is something I'd like to add to deliberations, just to make sure that as we're looking at this goal, that we have what we need.
Is it funded at the right level?
Yes.
Okay.
In terms of events and other things that might come up beyond what's currently budgeted.
Okay. Anything else on that one? $27, provide more information on the grant funding for transportation and school pool in Office of Sustainability. I think that was me. And I don't have any other questions about it right now. Tola?
I still don't understand what it is. Is this taking kids to the city's pool?
No, don't think aquatics.
Okay.
Think like
Carpool.
sharing
Oh.
transportation.
Okay. I read the first part about the salmon-friendly trips, and then I thought, how does that relate?
There's
to
water
the
references,
swimming
only in
pool?
one. Right.
Okay, now I got it. Thank you.
Okay. 28. Someone asked about us for a summary of all planned expenses related to water quality treatment issue.
Could be me, I don't know.
So can Emily, can you explain the answer? Because I don't understand what it's the question about the short-term water quality, long-term water?
Sure. The way that we had interpreted it was what is being expended, what is planned in the budget to be expended in 2017 for the PFC issue. So we have planned, as you know, to continue our lease for the carbon system and for the filter changes that need to occur to keep that system working well. And then we do sampling before and after those media changes so that we know everything is functioning well and we're getting the results that we need. So those are the costs that are included. The second reference, no additional funds have been included in 2017 for geosyntech. And we wanted to highlight that because right now we anticipate that we will, through their current scope of work, get enough information to provide us with options and recommendations on how to move forward with that issue. That will be
for one of the projects, the Newport Way Maple to Sunset. But I think we need to have a conversation about that. And let me just take a quick look in here. The other reason I think we need to talk about a phasing or a priority of projects is that there's a lot of questions and concerns out in the community about different stages of design. And so I think we need to talk about that in order to decide what we might want to add into the 2017 budget. And it's not a completely well thought out question, but I was trying to talk with a few other council members this week. It didn't work out so well. So I just throw it out there. I think it's something we need to talk about. I can flesh it out better
we're going to talk
later.
about our schedule later, but the next time we have a meeting for council budget deliberations is November 14th. So, so we'll know, that's after the election day. So the conversation we don't know what the conversation will look like.
Right.
I just throw that out. But yes, I think we put on deliberations and see how it, Bill?
And just to add to that, one of the questions I was looking at that I'd sent that just got a couple days ago, so you haven't really dealt with, is kind of leading into that, but a simple way for people to see what's being spent on traffic and road infrastructure this year. So instead of having to go through this and find all different things, it could be a separate thing on one page, say, since traffic is of most concern, here's what we're going to be doing this year. And maybe a 1, 2, 3 page, whatever, almost a separate little pull-out where it says, we're working on this street, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, and you can go to one spot and know everything. And that will be a little bit of saying, hey, these are all the things we're doing, we're working on them, it's easy to find, it's easy to understand. And you may find that some are in just barely the planning stage and some are going to be construction. And you can see that long range thing, and very simple and right in front of folks and say, here it is. This is what 2017 is going to get you. And so because right now it's hard when people ask what's really going to happen. So that's one of my proposals.
Anybody else? So we don't have all of our questions answered yet. Those are going to come back to us in a couple of installments after tonight. One of the things that I'm still mulling around in my head is as I consider what our stated priorities are, and particularly what the budget's supposed stated priorities are, number one being traffic congestion, or one of the top ones at least in the presentation. I'm waiting for some answers to see how that is manifested in our budget, how our if our budget is consistent, spending is consistent with what our top priorities are. So I'm not sure how that will, I may have other questions or things to add to the deliberation list, but I'm thinking about it slightly differently this year. And so that's, I guess, just a heads up what I'm thinking. Any other open mic comment, Tola?
I'm getting slightly confused. It seems like there's the informational session where we talk about things, and then when we get to deliberations, it's sort of like choice A, choice B, choice C. What Monty Hall, what's behind door C. And it seems like what we've just been talking about in the last 5 minutes or so is a little different than that, and so I'm not sure if I understand how that'll look in deliberations.
So that's a good question, and I'm not sure either. We don't have the answers to all the questions yet.
Right.
And so, for example, for me, depending on what the answers to one of my traffic/transportation questions is, I might throw out that I want to add to the deliberations list some additional projects or something like that. And so I don't quite know yet, but I think my point is that we might not be done with the deliberations list.
Got it. Yeah, I can see that because I've asked the administration to, the way I put together last year, that the history of cost per resident per dollar, or dollars per resident in real dollars, right? I've asked that they come up with a similar one this year, and that could potentially lead us to thoughts around where macroscopically where we're budgeting.
Paul?
Yeah, and I'm trying to track, and I'm sure I will compare notes with Emily and the staff as these, trying to identify as we talk about deliberation items. And like in past years where we can put up on a screen and we can look at it by fund, and so eventually, as we know, we kind of, in the end, we approve things by fund. And so that old structure of maybe new revenues in or out, expenditures in or out, discuss them line by line and see in real time their impact to each of the funds. That same structure is what I'm trying to compile in listening to all of this. And like I said, I'll be comparing with staff as well. So from a kind of the mechanical perspective, I expect it to look and feel like it has the last few years.
Right.
And we're still in the process, of kind of identifying what those are.
Right. Thank you.
And I think we have a good number of them. We actually do have a good number, quite a few.
Good meaning as in appropriately sized, or good as in large?
We have we have a number of them already clearly identified. I don't know if, hopefully that's helpful. So as you try to envision how we're going to go forward.
Yeah, no, I understand the general process and how a lot of the things that we've been talking about this evening would move forward, like, for instance, talking about the $250,000 for the study at Park Drive, right?
Right.
But it's really some of these questions around, like, timing of bond expenditures, right? I'm not sure how that...
It's a weird year.
What's that?
It's a weird year.
I just don't know how that translates into choice A, choice B, choice C. Which choice do we want, right?
So,
So to help answer that a little bit, you could come back and she could say, traffic is the #1 priority and we need more projects next year. And once we give you the question, you could say, I want to spend $4 million more next year in the budget. And then you tell us how we're going to pay for $4 million worth of projects, and we can come back with some options for you to consider, and then you could incorporate that into deliberations. So there is an opportunity to fit within the process based on the information that comes out of the answers to the questions that you asked.
I guess it's just the answers to those, the generation of that information, we've described it as part of deliberations. It really seems like it's a continuation of questions that we have, the process that we've been doing for the last 2 meetings, where we ask questions, we get data back, we ask questions, we get data back. But once you get to deliberations means something different, right? It means what Paul's talking about and what we've successfully done the last couple of years.
Yes.
So if I understand what you just brought up about, if let's assume the bond passes, And what is our priority and sequencing? What kind of policies and priorities should we have that help us not only to map out how to go forward with these projects, but in kind of, so in a sequence, how much per year? That'll have an impact on what's actually collected for property tax, has an impact of what our total spend is, how much would come from the bond, what would come from existing money that we have, what might come from other sources, and kind of lay out a multi-year program that identifies all of that information. And as I thought about that, I mean, I think there are some really key policy discussions we have to have. Just like, for example, the terms of the bond as proposed in front of the voters is up to $50 million, and really the at a mill rate of up to, I think, 0.3. And we know we can do some calculations on what that impact is. But we might have, a policy conversation about, which is about trying to establish a way, and I think this is one of the things you suggested, of how to proceed and kind of to maybe minimize that impact to property owners each year.
Right.
How can we do that? What does that look like, and what kind of policies would give us that guidance?
And also how, a $50 million bond in 4 projects, how to meter construction. That's a policy decision.
Right.
You're not going to take on 4 construction projects in the same year.
Exactly.
So there was a lot of policy questions in that, but when you look in the budget, there is just funding for one of the projects. And no, we haven't had that discussion about how we're going to do it, or what the priority project is, or if Providence Point is first. I don't see that in there. So that piece is, and it's unusual because it's a bond and we haven't done a bond like this before. So it is odd.
So I think about your ask, and first of all, I like it and I agree. Is it a budgetary exercise, or is it a capital planning exercise in addition to policy once we know if we have the funds or not?
So if the bond passes and we have the budget now, how do we do Providence Point? Is it in the budget?
So you would, so like when the rec bond passed, so you'd come back and you would have a conversation, and then you would do a budget amendment. So if it did pass, we'd have a conversation around exactly what you said at a work session, and then we would come back with a budget amendment to the council on how those funds would get done.
So from my thought process, there should be an assumption built into the budget that the bond passes or that it doesn't. And I assume that the budget is built around that it passes, and so I should be able to go and see that, and I don't. And so the whole budget amendment thing means it is that those policy questions are tied to budget, because I think we should build the budget one way or the other. And my opinion would be we build it that the budget that bond passes with that assumption. So if it's not built that way, we should build it that way.
I guess my point was that, well, we have a lot of policy to figure out to get there. And,
We do.
and we hadn't budgeted for that.
We haven't budgeted for it.
Okay. How could we do that?
How could we do that on November 14th? But what does November 14th look like? How does the budget change? Is that the question?
Well, I mean, I think those are very significant budget or policy conversations, and generally the formation of such budget. We have processes that we go through to, we get a proposal. We may have multiple touches on major policy decisions like that.
I agree. I think what's really awkward for me is that back in June, we voted to put these 4 projects on, and then we built a budget that doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate, I'm very grateful as a co-council member for you daylighting it that way. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, so I'm in agreement with you. I'm just trying to figure out how do we get what you want and what we have left to work with. I'm just trying to frame how we do that.
Yeah. I
Okay.
don't know.
Anything else right now? Mariah?
I just wanted to make sure that on the deliberation list, and I'm sure that we have it, but one of the questions that was asked were the costs related to the moratorium. What was on my mind was the housing strategy. And I just want to make sure that we have that on the list of something we can discuss.
Okay. Bill?
I'm going to speak, can I respond? I had the opportunity to talk to Bob earlier today, and we got into a little bit of detail about that very question on your behalf, because you had mentioned that to me. So I've got it captured, and I know that I'm going to speak for him. I know they're working on it, because I talked with them about it today.
Okay, great.
Bill?
Kind of on a similar note, I guess one of the things I look at, to me, this is, a draft budget, right? And what we're looking at. And to me, it should have all costs possibly that are coming your way be in there. And they may not be totally drawn out yet to exact amounts, but there should be some placeholders so we can anticipate them. And the moratorium she just mentioned is one of them.
The bond.
Projects, the
Road-
bond.
Road projects.
Those things, anything that you anticipate, at least put a placeholder in there that says, an estimate. Because what I don't like to see is amendments through the year on projects that we anticipated. And we may refine it a little bit, but I think in the overall, we should account for everything that's possible. Another example is if we need to do street modifications at the skate park, and we're doing the skate park, why aren't those in here? Any of those things that are possible should be in, and it may not be 100% defined because you don't know everything yet, but it should be there. Because I would look, during 2017, I would look really weirdly at things that come and say, well, why weren't they in the original budget, at least with a placeholder of 300,000, 500, whatever that is, then I would go, because then that throws the whole concept of looking at a balanced budget out the window. That's the point of the budget, is to have those. Then you may, if you get what I'm saying, it's a draft. Okay? So that's what I would expect. So any of those possible ones with an estimated placeholder in there, so we know. So if it looks like we're really going to have to dip into the general fund or one of these other funds or something more, we have that idea now, not later on, oh, we can take it out into fund balance. That feels awkward to me. So that's a big wish for me.
If there isn't anything else, I'll go to audience comments.
And talk about schedule too.
Yeah, after that. I was going to do that. I've got a list. Okay. Audience comments? Anybody in the audience wishing to make comments? Sure. Nope, no pressure.
No pressure.
You're holding the whole world on your shoulders right now, Mary.
My name is Mary Lynch, and I reside at 2690 Northwest Oakcrest Drive. And I am not going to repeat what the questions I asked last time, but I would hope to see answers to those in the near future. But you will notice on the email that I sent out today, there are a couple of new ones on there. One of them being Complete Streets and requesting that a new project, which is not even on the Complete Streets list, be added. And that being said, I would hope that the city staff would go back and look at other similar portions of streets. But the 7th Avenue sidewalks on the east side are non-existent for the most part, and this is city property. It's been identified in the Development Council or Commission meeting that there is need to totally tear up and remove the portion on the west side, that trail. And with Atlas going in and being a walkable community and the need for those new residents to get to IVE and the bus stop, the children, I would request that the city look at funding sidewalks on the east side, and preferably ones that are going to be permanent sidewalks so that we're not wasting city money, and or then work with the developer to maybe fund some of that, since right now, in order to provide safe access, the city staff has said that they need to put a temporary multimodal pathway along that side. So one of the flaws I see with the central area plan is we talk about half streets all the time. But every place we have a project starting, and that has already had a permit, I really think we ought to go through the complete streets list and see how can we fund that street on the other side. Because as Sheldon already said, if you do this all at one time, it saves the city a lot of money. And it also should be, we're looking at the vision of what we want that street to look like in the future. So I would ask that be added to the budget. I don't know how much it's going to cost. Mike Martin has said that he thought it was a good idea, but also said that it's not a complete streets list, so it probably can't happen. And I would like to turn that around and say it can happen and it should happen on not only this, but any other place where there are projects going in and funded. And those ought to be the priority. I see on the complete streets list, there's a lot of other projects that are studies to be done on Gilman and other places where projects aren't going in. And I would say, why are those on the top priority? Why aren't we looking at these others first? The other thing, since we don't have a CIP long-term, and you just showed tonight that there's basically $1,000 for parks, we have a park that you'll begin as part of Gateway, yet there's no funds identified for it out for who knows how many years. But yet all these tax dollars, including our park mitigation fees, are going to fund Central Park. Most of us on the west side of Issaquah never get up to Central Park. Number one, it's way too far for most of us to go. It's not an easy access for most of us. And I would ask that you look at the long-term plan and really prioritize where you're spending some of your mitigation fees and keep those in the area. Bellevue has done a really good job of working with these communities and giving different communities in the area so much of those their fees so that they actually can have it during a community meeting, can get together and talk about the community and where their priorities should be and what projects that happen there. I don't see that there's any money allowed in any of the budget for this to happen here in Issaquah, and I really think it should. If you're really going to go out and embrace and want to do public engagements in the different districts and communities, you ought to have some money set aside that you can actually do things and not say maybe let's do it towards another year, which I heard some comments tonight even with the traffic calming, because we still don't have any traffic calming that we continue to ask for Newport Way. And even if the budget or the bond does pass, we still have nothing that assures us that we will get anything happening out there or funded for the next 3 to 5 years out there. That being said, the other thing which I've pointed out to Chris Wright, and it was really nice to have the presentation on the Salmon Run Park, but that was not well publicized to the whole city. And it wasn't on the active projects list till after it started. So a lot of that was totally off the radar of most of the citizens. And I still don't understand why we can't have a map or a list out there that's easily accessible to those of us in the community to know what public works projects are going on. The same thing happened with the anti-aircraft project that we didn't know until it was already approved and designed, so we didn't get our upper half of the stream, which we've been asking the city for years to have on. So part of the budget process, I would like to see a map or some sort of online system put up so those of us in the community can easily go and see what public works projects are going on in our area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, so just got some few things to follow up on. So questions. We've submitted questions to the administration. The next installment of answers should be out back to the council this Friday, October 28th. And then Emily indicated to me that she anticipates the last batch of questions would be included in the packet for the November 14th budget meeting. So the brings us to when we should submit our last question, sort of a last call for questions. And so we're just going to put down November 1st as the last call for questions. That gives us until next Tuesday. It doesn't mean we can never ever ask any questions, but we kind of need to drop the gauntlet and move on because we've still have a lot of work to do. The next meeting, the next step in the process is that we have a public hearing on revenues, property tax revenues, and that's required. And that will happen on November 7th. We have, it's mentioned on the schedule that we'll have council budget deliberations that night. I don't expect that that will happen. That was sort of a preliminary schedule. And then our fourth budget review session is November 14th. And then we have a November 21st council meeting where it's tentatively on the schedule for final public hearing on the budget, which is also required, and then anticipated adoption of the final budget. I don't have any idea if that would happen. We have a placeholder of December 5th. But what we are, what leadership and the mayor's office has been talking about is probably the need to at least hold another meeting for budget deliberations, and maybe two, just to be on the safe side. So you have in your email inboxes a request to complete a doodle poll, and I would ask that you all do that by tomorrow night. It's important. We all are busy, and everybody has lots of things on their schedule, but the longer we wait, the busier we're going to be, and harder it's going to be to get together. We have a deadline of the end of the year for passing a budget. It's not optional. We have to do it, so we need to get the work done. So if you could go to that, take that doodle poll by tomorrow night, I would appreciate that, and so would the mayor's office. So the only other thing I can think of to go over, unless I've missed something, Bob, is whether we want to go over the list of what we have so far on the list of deliberations and the list of additional questions. So I have, for the list of additional questions, question number 20, we wanted more detail on why the cost was $250,000. I think that might be the last question I have, because the last question I have was, what's the delta between the number in the budget for the DSD fees and what the mayor can raise on his own? But that kind of gets absorbed into the deliberation question. So for deliberations tonight, I have master mobility plan, this is not a deliberation, it's just a comment. $250,000 for design for the Park Drive signalization. Number 22, question number 22 is $300,000. I think that might be complete streets. Next one, $300,000 for water treatment plant. Should we start saving rather than designing? Question number 25, adding all of the to be determines for deliberations. That has to do with traffic congestion. Number 26, and that must be the neighborhood engagement position. Is it funded at the right level in terms of advance, et cetera? The next one I have is all new positions are to be deliberated. The next one is the broad category of DSD fees. We need to talk about that, address it. The next one is about talking about I don't know how to categorize it. I just have the notes are, should we be talking about bond projects? Or starting, phasing, priority, how they did, yeah. Yep. How they should be assessed, whether the assessment should be metered, just sort of that large topic. Moratorium-related costs. And then I just added one on the end because I'm not sure I captured it last time, and that was about the skate park street modifications. Mm-hmm. What'd I miss?
You got them all. That's exact. I had the same list. The only other note I have here was the request from TOLA regarding that spreadsheet on the average cost per resident.
Okay.
May I add, I was actually tracking a few others as well from previously.
Yeah. We have a previous list.
Okay, so those were all just, some of those were repeats and some of them were new, okay.
These are just for that I captured tonight. Okay?
And then
Bill?
some weren't quite deliberations, but like I asked for is putting like all the traffic, street infrastructure information in one place, that's kind of more of a process and a presentation than what we'd be looking for. So there are some process kind of still things that are out there, not so much.
Yeah, and so, so those aren't part of deliberations.
Right.
Those are, I think, different policy questions about what, I guess,
How we present
what's
it.
included in the budget.
How to present information to the public. And that kind of gets one of the questions I sent to you, and not to the council yet, was looking at how the budget is finished. So at this point, we have, this document, and not having been through this before, basically understand that this is kept, and then council writes a letter and agrees to whatever changes are. And that to me is really awkward to the public, that you don't really have a final budget. To me, this is a draft budget. Whatever changes are made, you make the changes, then you have a document that is agreed to that has all those changes in there, not where you have to go to multiple places to look and try to figure out what's what. So I guess that's just part of the way I look at building budgets is you build a draft, you work on it, you make an agreement, and then you have a single document that incorporates all those changes and finalizations in place. So the public has a single document. Now, through the year, if we make some amendments, those obviously will be made at a later time. But at this time, we should end up with one document.
Don't we?
Yes.
Yeah, we end up,
Do we?
I thought we ended up with a final budget document that's published that we have on our website.
We do. Okay. And I was told differently.
Well, I think it's the timing. So it usually comes out like in January, if I remember right. So what?
Later.
Even later, a little later. But there is a final document that gets approved, and then, and so what you're adopting is the final budget, and then it's just when that final piece kind of comes in. I think is the reason because the actuals, well, yes. Well,
I think this is on.
It's
Good
on.
evening. Once the budget is finally adopted, then it's essentially the publishing of that document. And that happens then once we incorporate all of the changes. That budget is posted on the website. There's also a print version as well. That published document on the city's website is actually the document that we provide to the state auditor's office, to AWC, and to MRSC, and so that's a requirement. And usually that's in February. It just depends on the timing needed for publishing the actual physical final document.
Okay. Thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Checking what I heard.
Okay. Any other questions? Did I miss anything? Okay, doodle poll by tomorrow night. Questions in by November 1st. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all. We are adjourned.